Welcome to Faithful Politics Podcast. Hi, I'm Margaret Wright, wife of William Wright, your political host.
And I'm Ashley Burtram, wife of Josh Burtram, your faithful host.
And we have with us Nicole McKinney, wife of Phil McKinney, occasional guest of the show who always brings the witty repartee.
Hey, guys.
So the guys asked us if we would run a special podcast for Mother's Day, and they promised to watch the kids, which probably means someone's going to interrupt me at any point asking for yogurt and apple juice, even though Daddy was sitting right next to them downstairs. So just wait for it. All right. All right.
That's why we left our homes and came to a business.
Yeah, they had the right idea. They left their homes and went somewhere else. All right. Well, so let's start this off with talking about the year of the pandemic. And we're all mothers here. That's why, our husbands asked us to do this Mother's Day podcast. So I wanted to see and kind of get where you guys are at. How has the year of the pandemic, I guess years of the pandemic, how has it affected motherhood for you, especially being moms of really little kids? You've got some infants and toddlers in your mix. I've got 5 and 7-year-olds. So what do you guys think? How has this pandemic affected your mothering and motherhood in general?
Well, I can definitely say for me, it's been a challenge having my third baby this year in the middle of the shutdown back in September. The entire pregnancy experience, labor and delivery experience, the meeting family, meeting my sister and sister-in-law's babies who were also born in the year of the pandemic. It's been a challenge not being able to share, and I'm beyond blessed to say how much help that we have with our kids, and my family's able to come and visit and safely quarantine. We're blessed with that, but it was a whole different world just not to be able to go to ultrasounds. With my husband, he wasn't able to be there or to hear the heartbeat. He never heard the heartbeat, which was a really significant thing for our first couple boys. And there's something to be said for your third baby. We've been around the block with this before. It's not much new, but I think for me that was the most altering thing, was just having a baby, having a new brother that I couldn't really share or go see or go on walks with, or even invite you guys over to come meet him for a while. And it was hard.
That's what I was going to say. I'm relatively new to the Richmond area. So we moved to our house in October of 2019, and then obviously only had a couple of months before, the shutdowns and everything. So, we got to meet some neighbors and we have our church friends, but we couldn't get the same support and camaraderie that you get with mothers who, you can meet for play dates. And we couldn't even take our kids to the park for a while without a ton of what I call COVID shaming. It's like, there's a picture of you and your kids at the park. You must hate your children. It's like, oh my God, I love them. That's why we're here. And it was just like, I think there's enough motherhood shaming, period. And then to add the COVID shaming on top of that, oh, your kid's not wearing a mask, or and so I think that it made motherhood even harder because you have enough things to argue about with car seats and vaccinations and schooling, and and then you add COVID on top of it. So I think that it was definitely a hard year for the mother.
No, I agree. The COVID shaming. I mean, we were pretty strict ourselves, as you know. We were strict about, where we would go and mask wearing and stuff. But, I definitely felt like if we would go out to a park play date, I would tell people, please don't post these pictures on Facebook. I don't want anyone to know I was outside at the park with other people.
No one could know. Nobody could know. It was just this whole other level of scrutiny, which made me, questioning myself. And I think a lot of us were questioning, am I making the right choice for school for this year for my kids? Am I making the right choice for making my borderline 2-year-old wear a mask or not, or how we felt about vaccinations coming and potentially vaccinating kids? All the decisions that we have to make for our children and all the stress that comes along with those was also met with, again, like COVID shaming, the scrutiny that comes from everyone else in social media on you not doing the same thing that they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it goes both ways. If you are rigorous and holding to all the standards and people think you're doing the wrong thing, and why are you doing that with your kid? Why would you make your kid?
Yeah. No, I had a friend in the post office with her kids, and they were wearing masks like required by the post office. And an older lady walked up to her children and said, you don't need to wear those masks. You should take those off. And she's like, all right, we're just going to move along in the line. Like random people just coming up to her children, telling them to take off their masks. And, and then when other kids when your parenting style is different than maybe the other kids at the playground's parenting style, having those children be like, you don't need to wear a mask. Take them off. And my kids would be like, hey, this random kid at the playground said I don't need to wear this mask. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't want to like call out this kid like on the playground. So yeah, no, definitely that has definitely added like a whole new layer of guilt, of mom guilt and mom shame. Yeah. And then, if the people that did need to go back to work, so they had to send their children to daycare, like they got a whole level of just guilt and shame. And, I chose to homeschool my kids this year, which was just kind of like, partly, I think for me, it had to do with, I just knew school this year was going to be like bananas that they would be maybe in and then pull them out as soon as like people got COVID. So then like they'd be in and out, and then, virtual school, and then hybrid, and then which is, did what the schools did their very best, but that's what ended up happening. It was just a bananas year. And so I was like, foreseeing that, I knew that would be stressful on me and the kids. So I was like, well, let's just homeschool. That way we know what's happening this year. There's no variables. We're just going to do it. And so that's been, a journey. Like it's pushed us all to our limits. And some of it's been amazing. Some of it's like, man, I am rocking this homeschool mom thing. And then other days I'm like, I am terrible at this. What, why did I choose this? And so that's been really an interesting thing. Have you guys noticed how your kids reacted to all of the different rules of our world? Like, have you noticed any differences in, because especially for the really little ones, they're not even barely going to remember what it was like before, like pandemic rules and masks and, fist bumps and elbow bumps and like like I let this little girl give Ronan a hug after speech therapy because she was crying, and I was like, okay, she can give him a hug because she was like crying, tears down her face, and I'm like, I get it, she doesn't get that she just can't give all of her friends a hug, and I did, but I was like, swipe you down. No, I didn't do that, but but like kids it's a whole different, my kids they see friends but not as often as they did before, and it's a very different kind of social atmosphere. Do you think have your kids noticed that, or have you seen a difference with your children?
Well, I can attest to the young one. Autumn is 2, and we were just in the grocery store on Friday, and somebody was like, I can't believe she's just wearing her mask. It's like, well, when she was 1.5, she was seeing us wear masks and taking masks from a pile and practicing putting them on, because that's what they do. They imitate the grown-ups, and it's kind of like oh yeah, you're doing that, and they're like, oh, it's so heartbreaking that you have to practice putting on a mask at 1.5 years old. But I think, yeah, for like I have a 7-year-old son, a 4-year-old daughter, and a 2-year-old daughter. So all of them have just really taken it in stride in a lot of ways. Like they now remember, put on your mask when we get out of the car. And as a public school mom this year, I can attest it was bananas and they did try their best, but it was crazy. But, my son is in the routine. He knows, okay, do you have your backpack? You have your mask, before school. So it's very normalized to them. They don't know all the drama about it. They just know now it's an expectation. I do feel like, especially with my son, he's had a lot of heightened anxiety this year. I mean, you have to think it's like, no, you can't hug your grandparents for a little while. And, oh, this trip with my family was canceled. And you have to explain why. And when we do go to the park, it's, hey, 6 feet. And there was one time when my son came back to me when we were at the park And he was just like really just like overwhelmed and starting to cry. And I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "I don't know how to tell what 6 feet is." It
no.
was so heartbreaking.
Oh no.
And so I think those are like the things that's like they take a lot in stride, but then there are moments where you're just like, this is a lot for them and a lot for us. And then we're also navigating their emotions and it's a lot for them. So that's hard.
Yeah, no, that's definitely been a change. I can't imagine doing the public school thing this year. For my kids, I have, we had a baby this year. We also have a 6-year-old boy and a 3-year-old boy. And the 3-year-old doesn't know any different. We live, kind of out in the country, and I stayed home before the pandemic hit. So our life really doesn't look much different than it did before, except for my oldest. Um, we chose to homeschool this year, which actually ended up being a wonderful gift. I have loved spending kindergarten with him. It's been a lot of fun to kind of get to know him more in this really formative year. So I feel very lucky for the way that our COVID year looked. But for him, there's been several times where he's asked what his friends' names are because he can't remember them. Or he'll ask, my friend with the playground that's really big, it's bigger than at our house. And I'm like, oh, you mean Claire? And he's like, yeah, I couldn't remember her name. And he can't remember any of his friends' names, but he can describe them and describe what they look like or what their houses might look like. He's cried. Phil and I chose to get the vaccine, and we did that a few weeks ago, and we brought the whole family. We brought the kids with us. For one, out of necessity, because we didn't have childcare. But for two, we try to do things as a family. And when I told James what we were doing and why we wanted to do it, he cried. And he said something along the lines of, so people won't be sick anymore, so I can play at the playhouse where the chicken is.
Oh.
He was talking about Chick-fil-A playhouse. The things that he's drawn attachments to from a very young age is, we go to Chick-fil-A for playtime with an instructor there. It was twice a week, and we'd play at the playhouse afterwards, and it was a lot of fun, and we weren't able to do that this year. They are going to have memories of what they've given up. And so I think it's been a real joy to be able to selfishly have my kids to myself this year. But also for their growth. Really sad. And it's kind of that balance where trying to manage, like Ashley said, making decisions for ourselves and managing, but also for the kids. That's kind of the weight of motherhood, whether there's a pandemic or not. It's making those choices for our kids that we have to decide, is this good for you or not? They don't really get a choice. And then we carry the weight or guilt or peace or whatever we're carrying for the rest of, forever. So
yeah, forever.
Not will, but the Chick-fil-A playhouse being closed was a major stressor onto a lot of American mothers, I have a feeling.
Story time, I will say, story time. Ashland Chick-fil-A, please open as soon as it's safely. I miss you.
Sorry, Margaret, go ahead.
No, that's pretty funny. It is interesting to mention the good parts because I do feel like we have spent so much really good quality time as a family this year. And my kids are just used to just chilling at the house now. I mean, we try to go out for walks and, go to the park and stuff like that. But we haven't really been doing a lot of indoor stuff. Like I don't really want to take them to the children's museum. I didn't even know what was into that, what happened with that, with their hours. I think they were doing their very best to sanitize. But, even in the best of sanitizing situations, it's always a little bit, grimy in the play places. And so, we were just really limited on options of what to do with the kids. And so they've really just adjusted. They love hanging out with us, which is how much longer can that last, And so part of it has been really good. My oldest 7-year-old this year has been like a burst of personality. It's like every year they get a little bit more of who they're going to be eventually, And this year it's like I'm getting so much more of him and his quirks and how funny he is and all these things. And so he's just starting to say really interesting and unique things. And so I am really grateful because I know when we go back, I've enrolled them for school next year, and I know when we go back, I'm going to have a lot less time with them. And I guess I can really be grateful. And I know that's not everybody's experience this year. A lot of people, don't stay home with their kids and didn't have that same opportunity to do that. But I guess I can feel really grateful. But I do feel, kind of the darker side of things. I know some families that really feared for their kids' mental health. I appreciate that I don't have teenagers right now because I can't even imagine having to limit, what they do with their friends, because that's got to be really hard as a teenager, not being able to, you hear about teens committing suicide this year and that being up. And that's really, really sad to me. And knowing as a parent, okay, I have to balance, public safety and public health and the potential that we could get COVID and get really sick with my child's mental health and allowing them to have some kind of life. And, that's a huge balance. I mean, have you guys, Ashley, I know that you have a lot of community, you're involved in the community a lot. Have you seen any of that or,
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that I have family members that are they have teenagers, and I know talking to them throughout the pandemic, they did let their kids hang out with friends and go do things, and again, they received a lot of shame for it, but they said, we have to let them continue to live in some ways. I mean, they weren't going to big giant parties and things like that, but they made that choice for them, and I know that I'm sure that was a hard decision, but I know that they had to stand by that and say we're doing that. They have 3 teenage kids, and including and some other teenage foster kids that were coming in and out of the home during that time too, and they're going, well, what are we going to do, just stop fostering because we're trying to protect our bubble? This is part of our ministry that we're doing. So people put a lot of stuff on the line to continue to help their community and things like that, and let people inside of their maybe immediate family bubble for the greater good, and continuing to do ministries and food banks and things like that, and dropping off things at people's doors. And there's some things that were put up to make those things safer, but a lot of those things were still at risk. So I really applaud the healthcare workers and people that continue to put themselves at some risk for the betterment of moving community forward, and helping people in need and things like that. It's a hard spot to be in.
amen. For all of you out there working out there in the trenches, whether it be in mental health field or social work or nurses, and we just appreciate everything you're doing and continue to do to be, our community helpers and support. So we're at a good clip here, guys. Let's go ahead and shift from talking about the pandemic into a little bit about politics and motherhood. So let's see. When we think about women's issues, particularly mothers, the first thing I think about is maternity leave. And I knew I sent you guys a chart of like all the different countries and what their paid maternity leave looks like. And all of us are stay-at-home moms, the 3 of us, which we all chose, and for the most part, totally enjoy. um, but it's true that the U.S. ranks the lowest among like industrialized nations, having 0 paid weeks of maternity leave, versus like Estonia, was it, that had 60 or 86 paid weeks. And then, all these countries in between, but a lot of countries having at least a year of paid maternity leave. My question is, would your decision for staying home with your kiddos be different if the U.S. had an extended paid maternity leave policy? Would that have made a difference for you, or a difference in your finances, frankly?
Who wants to go first?
Well, of course, there's like a lot of different factors that go into all of that. I was a working mom until we moved here to Richmond and we had our 3rd kid. And so that, when you talk about the finances, when you've got 3 kids and and they're not school age yet, so you're thinking about daycare costs. I mean, at least in the ministry field that I was in, we would be paying for me to work. So I think that is definitely, I mean, with my part-time status, and I probably wouldn't have even maybe made the cutoff for getting the paid maternity leave, just since I chose to go part-time once I had kids. But again, I mean, that may have impacted if I was part-time or remained full-time. I mean, at one point I had the opportunity to go full-time, but I just felt like I wanted to do a little bit of both and not miss out on all the, like we said, the, stay-at-home moments that you have with your kids. It was a good balance for me personally to work part-time. But then once I had three, it didn't even make sense anymore for me to do that. So I think it definitely would have been easier to consider that
Mm.
if there were, more paid options for taking time off, because you do get to the point where you're going, I can't send my kid to daycare. Even before COVID, you're not supposed to send your kids sick to daycare. So one of the parents has to stay home. So, I mean, I think we're talking about, parental leave as an entity. It is maternity leave, but it's also parental, because if you are in a two-parent household, or if it's a father who's, has the kids, it's an all-encompassing thing. I mean, I know my sister, she has two boys that are 8 and 6, and then they just have two new babies, one biological, one adopted, that
Woo!
are 6 months and 3 weeks. And they're dealing with that right now. She works from home, she works, and her job has been very flexible and giving her time, and but not paid. She's having to still going, well, I want to work this many hours while they're napping so I can still, get this or that. And they have been very flexible. Hey, your job is going to be here. But I know for her husband, they've been letting him work some from home when there's appointments or different things that she needs to run out for. But they're very nervous about that. Like, if they make cuts, is that where they're going to go? Because he's working from home. Now, he feels like he could be just as effective in his job at home as he is because so much is virtual now, as he is when he goes into the workplace. But yeah, it's, you don't want to be in the workforce as a parent and always be afraid that being a parent is, negatively impacting the way that people see your efficiency or they see your work ethic. So that can be a really scary thing, whether you're a mother or a father and you have parents, that you're working with in the workforce. I think that can be a big consideration for both moms and dads.
Yes, absolutely. That's really interesting. And I do think parental leave is now the term that a lot of, countries are using, not maternity leave. I said that for the benefit of the Mother's Day podcast, but but no, I mean, a lot of countries actually have joint leave. I think in Canada, my friends were telling me like parents can, like, there's a certain amount of allotted time they can get, and they can each take a certain portion of that, however they want to allocate that, which I think is also really, really cool. And I'm sure that's in other countries as well. So, what about you, Nicole? What about your choices?
Well, I don't know that it would have changed things for me. The decision for me to stay home, um, my husband and I have conversations about this frequently on when I would like to go back to work because he is very ready for me to start helping with the breadwinning again. Before I stayed home, Phil and I made the same money. We had double the income that we had now, and it was a wonderful job. I was under some incredible leadership under Ron Keith and his ministry, and that was it was amazing. And there was so much growth there, and there was so much. Um, the first time I felt invested in this job that I was in, I was able to give back to the people I was teaching, and staying home was a decision I made because honestly, my husband and I prayed and we felt this is what we needed to do. It was an obedience thing too, where we felt God was calling us, and I did. And it's been amazing and I have loved it, but I do find myself wondering about going back to work. I do know that I have several friends with babies who went back to work at 6 weeks postpartum because they couldn't go without a paycheck. you have a dinner plate size wound in your abdomen if you've carried a baby for what, a month, and okay, now you're supposed to go back to work. Sorry. And then, oh, at 6 weeks you get to see your doctor for the first time. This is an all encompassing issue, is my point. And I think of others who can't survive without the paycheck. Now, I will say this: in looking at mandated paid family leave, um, the US is run a little bit differently some other countries on the list, because I did do some research on this. There are actually 4 states, I think 5 states now as of 2020, who do she looked it up too, who do offer who do mandate paid family leave. And I think it's important to note that the US, um, it's a big divisive thing on whether states should have, sovereignty over their own state, or the federal law needs to be applied to all states. And amongst conservatives and liberals, blanket laws versus individual local areas, it's a big conversation. But I do want to give major props to the states who are offering paid family leave now. California, Colorado, coming soon. Connecticut, she wrote that on the paper. Connecticut, DC, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, also coming soon. Rhode Island, and Washington State, my home state. I'm very, very, very proud. Yeah, so my mind goes to those who cannot live without one parent's paycheck, and what are they supposed to do, and why haven't we figured this out yet? Why has our need for independence as a nation and as individuals taken precedence over helping people work and build the nation up and build the economy? Why are we so hesitant to see what other countries are doing? Why are we so late to the game? I think it's what's frustrating for me when I think of all of those who have that real significant need, who want to work. These are not lazy people. They're just the moms who need some time to physically heal, to bond with an adopted child, especially if you're fostering to adopt. There's challenges there emotionally and mentally. So there's psychologist appointments, everything that goes into that. All those adjustments are not considered, they're almost considered penalties. To Ashley's point, it's almost a penalty to be a parent in the workforce in America. I would 100% agree with that.
That's a really super good point too about, your foster kids and adopted children and having that time. It's not just about the physical aspects of bearing children, which is a huge deal when, especially a lot of times, I don't know, for some women, they bounce back really fast. I never bounced back really fast from my pregnancies. I can't imagine. I'm so grateful that I was able to stay home. But I know that there are women who went back before their 6 weeks because they're like, I feel like I met someone that was like, I was back at 2 weeks because we just literally could not afford for me to not work. And I'm just like, 2 weeks. I'm still like hobbling around, like trying to hold my pee in at 2 weeks. And excuse me for
Go
you
see.
sensitive.
Go see.
We haven't started talking about placentas yet. So there's that.
Well, no, you said dinner size.
I said dinner size wound,
Oh,
but
okay.
the placental attachment side.
I will say also that there has been that I have seen a lot of good information swirling around trying to educate people about what paternal leave is, and it's paternal and maternal leave, but that, like, if you think that people are staying home and like, yes, I'm gonna milk this whole thing for all it's worth, like, milking, yes, if you're breastfeeding,
much milk,
but not like, it's not a vacation. It is not vacation. And I think every mom that's listening to this right now is like clapping in their car or whatever. Like, it's not a vacation. And it's really a necessity. It's like you're not even sleeping, and your work is not going to be up to par of what you want it to be going back to the workforce, early, if you're not getting any sleep, if you're worrying about your young child in someone else's care, before you're emotionally ready, you're not going to be able to be present and even give your organization probably what you would be able to after a more substantial amount of time. So yeah, I think, anybody that is saying that people are just trying to get these free vacation weeks.
Well, even, my cousin, she might be listening. She has adopted 2 children. They were older, but they had a lot of sleepless nights because their children, were adjusting to a new home environment, especially as older children, learning to get to know each other and new people. And I can only imagine how beneficial that would have been, to have like an extended period of time just to like figure that out and to work with that. I mean, we all make it work. All of us are making it work. People are doing that. But it's kind of quality of life as far as I'm concerned. If we're living in a wealthy nation, we should be able to kind of figure that out. So I guess I think I know the answer, but would you support legislation favoring something like that? I understand that that's kind of if you're a fiscal conservative, that's a sticking point because I mean,
Yeah.
how are they going to fund that? How are they going to enforce that? And I totally get that. I do see other countries obviously are doing it. They're figuring out a way. Is that something that do the benefits outweigh
Yeah, I don't. I when you say it's sticky, that's kind of where I'm feeling right now with it. I looked up what some of these other states do, and they basically take it out of the employees' paychecks as I think California is like 1.2%, and one of the other states is like 0.5% or something. But then they can't actually have it starting until several years from now because it's such a low amount. So you are taking it from somewhere. And I was just kind of thinking, I mean, most of these, I think you have to have an organization that has 50
Mhm.
employees or more to even come under
to do the
the
FMLA.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, like, Josh and myself, we started our church here. So basically, it's essentially kind of like small business owners. I mean, it rides on a lot of our leadership and all this stuff. So let's say we had, a staff member named Nicola or something. Just, let's say she was our staff member, and she had like a huge chunk of what we were doing in the organization, and then she has a baby, and we have to, as an organization, pay for her, like legally have to pay for her to be gone and not actually giving to the organization. Like that could really hurt a small organization. So you do have to really think through, the benefits and the risks. And I mean, I do like that a lot of these states are able to do their own thing. And I think a lot of companies are just choosing to do that on their own. And they're really getting applauded for it, which is, I like to see that. I wish that would just keep happening, and maybe it will. Maybe it'll take longer, but it can happen on its own, to where companies are saying, hey, we value parents because, parents can have a perspective and do have perspective that a non-parent doesn't have, and non-parents have perspectives that parents don't have. And then it's that sharing of ideas that can really raise up an organization to see things from all sides. And so I think that organizations that value the input of parents are going to start doing that and put their money where their mouth is, and value um, the parents to be able to take paid leave and still remain a big part of their organization.
Yes, I would love to see, I like to see outside of the box thinking. I've always, I studied abroad in Germany and I had lived there for a little bit. And so I always, think about all of the awesome things about, their socialized medicine and different things that they have. But I'm always a believer that there's more than one way to do something right, and what works for one place might not work for another place. So I do love that sort of out of the box thinking, different states kind of taking initiative, and companies, maybe people will be more inclined to work for a company that has better benefits like that. And so maybe there'll be a natural inclination. But, love to see. Do a little more research on that. I did zero
Always
research. I told you guys I was going to ask you some questions, and you guys came with some good research that I did not do. Thank you. So we're at the 34-minute mark. I would like to kind of shift things now. You guys are awesome at discussion. Let's shift things over to the faith religion side of the podcast. And so, what are your feelings about women in positions of leadership in the church? I know you guys have both worked in church organizational settings. So, what are the typical norms that you've seen in church organizations, and what direction would you kind of like to see churches head in, honestly? without, offending anyone's families or but in general.
I will, yes, I will say I don't, um, I'm gonna let Ashley take point on this, but I will say in my experience of women in ministry and working in corporate America and in a church, it does not look that different, sadly, when you really get behind the doors of a church. And to speak Christianese, big C church, is like the big um, conglomerate that makes up, the Christian faith's home, I guess is the best way to put it. It doesn't look that much different than corporate America. There's hierarchies of leadership and rules and everything, and women finding their place in a church, I don't think is that much different than finding a place in corporate America, and the challenges that come with our 77 cents to a dollar and everything else we deal with, harassment and 1,000 other things. So with that said, I will pass it over to Ashley.
Well, I am grateful to be ordained in an organization called the Assemblies of God that really it was founded on women leadership and has sustained that through its century here, just about a century, I think, in the U.S. But in the executive leadership in the last decades, it's all been men. Until I think it was 2 years ago, a woman from Ohio was made the secretary treasurer. So she knows me sort of, because Ohio's my home state. So I kind of grew up. Her name is Donna Barrett, and she was placed into the executive leadership. But they really applauded that, and they were excited about it. And so, but I know that there are a lot of Christian organizations that are not that way. That there has been a term called complementarianism. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. But it's built on the idea that men and women were created differently by God, but equal, which is what I believe. And I think that we are different biologically. We have different inner workings in our brains a lot of times, but it has been twisted into this thing where it's that women have to come under men, especially when it comes to leadership in the church, because of several of Paul's teachings in his letters to the church, basically saying that women should be silent and they should listen. And I think, there has been a lot of study on those passages, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that does mean that women should be silent in the church. I mean, but it's not 100% that that's what he means. I think if you look at some of the other things that he says in several letters, he is really encouraging the women who lead churches in their homes. And so that just would be totally contradictory. Why would he say that and then say that and that's how the churches were done then? I mean, they were house churches, which is what, Josh and I are trying to do here in Richmond, Virginia, which is very cool. But I think, you can take those verses out and they can be taken out of context. Mm-hmm. And so it's been sadly, I know that on the podcast, there's been conversation about how the Bible has been used to silence Black voices, mm-hmm. and to promote slavery and racism. And it's also been used in a lot of sexist ways. And I think that it actually really drives people away from God and from Jesus.
Yeah.
Because the church is making this patriarchal hierarchy that is not, I don't believe, is biblical. I mean, you can go back to Genesis, where God creates man and woman, and say, well, woman was created from man, and so that she's made to be a helper, but that can also be translated as ally. And so I think we just have taken our English Bible and circled words and said the woman is less. And you really have to go back to the original language, the original translation, the original context. A lot of what Jesus did was so outside of the box in raising women up, even beyond what the society was at that time. And so I think God has always empowered women. He's always brought them into ministry. If you look at Deborah, who was a judge, and they're in the Old Testament. So, I mean, you can look at really impactful women in the Bible and say, women are not outside of this thing. Like, they're integral. And I think the Catholic Church, they really respect Mary and the mother of Christ. And I really appreciate that, that it's not, now I don't, in my beliefs believe that she is a deity, but I can appreciate the focus that they put on her as being someone who was so integral into what God did by sending Jesus. And I don't know. Do you have any other questions about what I just threw out like a ton of
No,
stuff?
I love all of that. I really appreciate that. I grew up in a pretty conservative Christian environment, and well, first of all, I want to say my friend Amanda Clark in Indiana, I'm super proud of her. She just became the lead pastor of a local church there and is doing really cool things. And I'm so proud of that, her and the church, that they, it's not even like batting an eye. She's awesome, and her husband, Justin, is making these really funny TikTok videos of his life as a pastor's wife, which are pretty hilarious. But it's also just shows like kind of the role women have been put in as pastors' wives. And Ashley, like I kind of consider you and Josh joint pastors of our little church, but a lot of times, people just consider the wife of the pastor just sort of this sort of invisible helpmate that behind the scenes doing, you know what I mean? And women really have been put into these roles. I remember as a kid, and if my dad's listening, I hope he's not embarrassed by this because he's changed a lot in his life. But we went to this fiery Pentecostal church when I was little. And so preaching was screaming, really, just a lot of yell preaching. And so I was a little girl, like 5 years old. And I actually do remember this. My family still makes fun of me, but I would stand on the bed and look in the mirror and scream like fire and brimstone. And my family would be like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm preaching." And I was like, "I want to be a pastor." And my dad would say, he would sit me down and say, "Margaret Jean, you can't be a pastor. You can be a missionary." Like, here's your alternative. But like he would tell my mom he should probably talk to her. And he doesn't feel that way now. He's gone through a great change. That was in the early 80s. So but I mean, those are the real voices that we've always heard. And even if people are like a lot more open to women in leadership now, you just don't see it often, even though the three of us have talked about women have lots of leadership skills and insights and understandings. And when I hear Miss Nicole over here preach, when she just preaches when she's just thinking, she like stream of consciousness preaches. And it's always good. And it's always like stuff that I like want to write down. And so I just, what direction do we see that these changes are being made? Do you think that it's happening? Like we're going to see more women in like head pastor roles, and not, what I mean? Like that, not just like that woman speaker who travels and visits other women, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of, that exists, but like actually, like a lot more women in, even evangelical circles, like, you see more women preachers in some of, I don't know, what you would call them, other kinds of churches, a little bit more, traditional settings, actually, instead of like evangelical settings, are really holding to these these kind of like men in leadership roles. It's kind of interesting because when I was growing up, we were always like, oh, those conservative churches versus us, charismatics. We're part of the new movement, but then women were still put in this box. And so, do you see a change? Like, I'm kind of out of church organization. I haven't, but do you see that changing or moving in a direction?
It would be a better one for you.
Okay. I will say some of it is not as much of a like an organizational idea. Like they, in theory, it's like, yes, we believe women, we want to support women. But in my experience, I mean, I've wanted to be in leadership in the church ever since I was a teenager. So I was in this safe place called Kids Church where women are allowed to teach the kids. So I did that. But I also, like I practiced my preaching in some fine arts competitions. And, you know, Josh and I, we have an ongoing discussion about this because when we were both seniors in high school, Josh from the DC area and me in Ohio, we both won first place in the state for preaching in our Assemblies of God fine arts competition.
Did not know that, but it suits you.
So, but my family with our vacation schedule wasn't able to go to the national competition, and Josh did, and he like got in like the top 3 or something. And I still wonder if I would have beat him. I don't know, but we didn't really meet each other until the next several years when we were in college. Like the next year, I guess we met. But wouldn't that have been funny if we would have gone head to head in the preaching competition? But I'll just say that's an idea of what younger Ashley was like. You know,
Sure. Well,
hold on, you're muted first.
Sorry. I said if you believe it, if you believe in the parallel universe theory, there is a world in which Ashley won that competition. So
yes, there is. I want to tag in there with that gender roles. I think what's something that we talk about with young girls growing up, like for me as well, even as a young adult now going into my 30s, I still don't feel qualified. You know, I still wrestle with, are women allowed to be preachers and be leaders? Maybe if I pray a lot or I fast enough, I can be a secretary. Maybe I can do that kind of thing and still be involved and give my input. But you think about young men versus young women growing up in the church. Young women are their fires are put out. They're relegated to kids' church. They're relegated to secretarial work, worship team, maybe worship pastor if they have a husband that can, you know, put their name on things first. But young men are encouraged and brought up and told, yes, that's wonderful. Go to Bible school, or that's the way it's been, and I want to see that change. So I wanted to slip in there with the gender roles via, you know, the Bible and how we look at Paul's teachings and we look at what Jesus did. And we look at Old Testament and the roles of women and how much is cultural and how much is Christ. And we relegate these gender roles to our churches based on what we think God wants. This is what God wants. God wants women in the home, and women are important. I'm not saying that's not critical and not important, but it's a larger conversation to have besides women can be pastors or not pastors. It's women in general and their role in as wives, you know, because we bear children, we are responsible for how they turn out. Where is the father's role in this? And then you look at the genealogy of Jesus, and women are mentioned.
Yeah.
Hint, a prostitute is mentioned. It's crazy, but women are acknowledged in Jesus' genealogy, just to show that he is a descendant of David. He is also a descendant of, you know,
I almost feel in some ways, because I know we've been talking about that in our church's study, but I almost feel like when they do mention these women, like they're really mentioned in detail, like the lives that they led and the things that they did that were so important. And I almost feel like the men are just kind of glossed over in a way. Like, here's the genealogy. Okay, then this woman, she did this like really cool thing. And I'm like, are these men just in there? Yeah. Like, who's doing the real work here? No, but that is like a really strong impression you get.
Yeah. Who is doing the real work here? I would say pushing out children. We might qualify for that.
Well, okay. So when I was thinking about prepping for this podcast, I was thinking about my big fat Greek wedding. Do you remember when the mom says, the man is the head, but the woman is the neck that turns the head?
I do. And I remember thinking, what a great way of explaining the helpmeet relationship of a woman. And now as an adult, I am frankly just a little TO'd that I fed into this picture of like this is where we're supposed to be. And even, my in-laws, I love you, and my parents, hello, but very fundamentalist in their ideas about women at home. And I do believe it's important that we raise our kids up right. Our definition of right, doing our best to bring them up how we believe they'll be prepared for their world, not our generation. And I think one thing that Ashley brought up was, it's not necessarily the churches and the congregations, but it's the individuals and the way that their ways, and how much do I pass on to my kids from my generation, and what's been handed down as this is the way we've done things, based on culture, not necessarily on Christ or the word.
And we are all very blessed to have husbands that are super supportive of, I think, our leadership and our voices. And that's why we're here on this podcast, right? So that's an important thing to teach our sons too. I think we're teaching our sons to respect women and to listen to their voices and what value they bring. I know we're coming up here on an hour, but I did want to share just some of my story, just of growing up in the church as a girl who felt like I had leadership and preaching capabilities. I did serve in these roles in children's church, and I ended up going to Bible college. But when I was a teenager, I remember I would go into the church office on Wednesdays. And I would sit at a desk because I said, I'll help. I want to help. I want to help lead in the youth group. And so my youth pastor would give me a list of names and phone numbers and say, call these kids and see if they'll come to youth group tonight. And so I didn't mind doing that. Okay, whatever I need to do to help. But the thing that it's burned into my brain. These, I don't know. I can't. I'm trying to think of a nice term for these teenage boys. They're teenage boys, whatever. They were rambunctious. They weren't coming to help, but they would come. The youth pastor would go take them to Taco Bell, and they'd all go out and they'd get some. And that's what they were doing while I was in the office on the phone, calling to see if kids could come to youth group. And he was spending time with them and not with me. Now, I look at that now as an adult and I say, almost what choice did he have? A 20-something-year-old youth pastor, he couldn't take a 16, 17-year-old girl out to, think of like the Me Too movement and all the things that, that could go wrong, even if he was completely, harmless. Yeah. And so that kind of even went into my young adulthood when I became a children's pastor out of college. I mean, the pastor was in his 60s, and he, encouraged. I was able to preach in front of the congregation from time to time. I mean, they didn't snuff me out in that way, but I didn't get time. And that's what you need. You need time, and you need mentorship as a leader to be able to rise up. So I think that these things are changing, and they will change as more women step into this. So then now when I am a woman pastor now, when I see a young girl that has those same capabilities, I can take her out. There's just not enough. I wouldn't expect an older man to take me out one-on-one to dinner without somebody going, is this good? Is this healthy? Yeah. There are ways around it. We meet in the office with the door open, whatever, all these other things. But like you said, in the corporate world or the church world, you do need to be careful. If you're a married person, you shouldn't be doing one-on-ones with the opposite sex or, same gender, if that's the way that you go. You need to be careful to guard yourself, because adultery is a messy thing and can be really harmful to your marriage and your family. And so it's funny to almost bring that in, but I think that affected me because as a young leader, I couldn't get any time with the leaders that were ahead of me because they were all men.
Yeah.
And so I think that as more women are around and more women see that and take the time to pour into the next generation, we'll be able to exponentially empower the girls of tomorrow.
Yeah.
That is where I want to stop, because who can beat that, Ashley? That's amazing. And I think that that's the key. Women stepping into these positions of leadership, even if we don't feel 100% prepared, because we haven't had the mentorship, but just doing it so that our, I don't have daughters, but you have daughters, so that they can see and my friends' daughters, they can see us stepping into these positions, and that becomes normal to them. And now we have a, woman in the White House, which is a phenomenal and
Hmm.
super exciting, regardless of your politics. For women, that is
Right.
huge. It's huge. There were tears at the inauguration just because, regardless of if you think that she is the right woman for the job, she was a woman. And
Right.
our girls need to see women in leadership, whether it's in the church, whether it's as, bosses in companies. Sometimes we don't feel, I know that you said this, Nicole, sometimes you don't feel like, am I capable? Can I do this? And I think we overthink, just an example with my husband. He started a wedding business and he just decided to do it. He married some friends and he was like, "Oh, I can do this." And he just started the business and he created a website. And it took me months to like work, even though I've done theater and I can stand in front of people and sing. It just took me months to get the courage to even just do a friend's wedding, and just to like feel comfortable, because I'm like, well, I'm not qualified for this. How am I? Whereas like I think men just like, oh, I'm just going to jump in and then I'll become qualified. And so I think,
Yeah.
and I that might
Yes.
be a thing, that a woman thing, where we're just like, we feel like we have to be totally prepared before we step up. And maybe it's just, all right, you know what, there's only so much preparing we could do before we have to step up to be an example for
Right.
the girls coming
And I
up.
would love to give a quick challenge just to anybody that's listening. Number one, if you're a man and you've listened to this whole podcast, thank you for not turning us off. I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
because I think that's where it starts, with men being able to listen to women's voices and respect what they say and hear their perspective. And if you're a woman listening, whether you have, kids, whether you have daughters, I think you can see how can you empower someone else's daughters. I think, you two don't have daughters, but you can, at some point my daughters won't want to hear what I have to say, but maybe they'll listen to you. And I know my sister-in-law Afshan has done a great job with this. She doesn't have any kids. She's married to Josh's brother Kevin, who produces the podcast actually. Um, and she will spend time with my girls and say, "Hey, you're beautiful, but you know what, you're really strong too, and you're really smart." And she'll speak those things over my girls, and I think they need to hear that, not just from mom, but from other strong women in their lives. And so that's where I think any woman, mother or not, can really help empower the next generation of women leaders, women supporters, women in the workforce, just by uplifting them and speaking positive things into their lives. Body image, intelligence, all of those things. Just be who you are in front of them and teach them to be strong and be who God made them to be.
Amen. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for joining us today and just contributing your vast wisdom. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on this special Mother's Day episode of Faithful Politics. Don't forget to join the discussion on our Faithful Politics Facebook group. And happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day.
Yay!
All right, I'll see you guys later.
Yeah.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.